You ever lose in an online fighting game and get really mad, decide to reach out to the person? This could be Guilty Gear or Melty Blood, any of those side-scrolling 2D games that has cute anime girls or something of that variety, basically games that are trans adjacent, and then you discover that you just lost to a trans woman. So you decide to reach out to this person and they agree to train you, and as you're getting trained, they hear your voice, and then she says with Gregorian might, "Oh, you're black." And you're curious how she can tell your race through your voice. You're a little bit confused. You're actually insanely confused because how did you get my exact race right through the reverberations of my vocal folds? And they immediately turn on their camera only to reveal they are a furry, they are far right, and they're pure MAGA, and you're very confused about everything you're witnessing there because you think these ideologies cannot coexist. But this kind of identity only appears online. Now, you may be saying to yourself, but these people exist in the real world. Correct, but they congregate in online spaces. Let me explain what I mean. In nature, there is this phenomena when it comes to the phenomena of snowflakes. Every single snowflake has a different fractal arrangement. You may not know this. This is where the term special snowflake comes from. No two snowflakes are exactly the same. And because there's so many different special snowflakes, whether they be on the right, the middle, or the left, there's so many different people that want to stand out in their own set political ideologies. They wish to be different from the herd or the pack. And because these people want to be different, they decide to go so far on the extreme of what they truly feel on the inside. The far-right trans identity that surfaces online is not a contradiction that breaks any political categories. It is a predictable outcome of specific conditions, and understanding those conditions matters more than being shocked by the existence of a far-right trans identity. See, this lives online simply for one reason and one reason alone, because the internet allows identity to become a costume rather than a risk. I'll explain it in the best way I can. You see, political alignment becomes something you declare without it immediately paying the social, physical, and institutional price that you would arrive offline. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, you could be a Republican online and nobody would care at all. Unless you're arguing with somebody. You could just go into Republican spaces and never actively show you're Republican in the real world. You may not get in the same tax bracket. You may not have the same social groups. Your whole social group could be left, right, liberal. They could be middle ground. They could be you couldn't be far right is what I'm saying. That's what it is. Online spaces reward extremity, clarity, defiance. So a far right trans identity becomes a kind of ideological spectacle that generates attention. It's engagement. It's perceived strengths, all without requiring exposure to the real systems that ideology empowers. You see how I can't touch you? You see that? That's insulation between the screen. Insulation like this creates confidence for you to say anything crazy in the comments. Confidence hardens beliefs that have never been stress tested by actual authority. Where you can log out, block, mute, or migrate platforms, belief systems never collide with material consequences. The internet makes ideology feel like a personal brand rather than the actual reality of lived in with contact with power. If a trans person was actually truly far right in the real world, they will be ostracized by every community in the far right communities because of how it naturally goes hand in forth. That's the reality of the situation. You may actually be saying to yourself right now, maybe I actually can see you type in that comment saying, well, this makes sense because there's a lot of gay Republicans. These are two separate things. I want to point this out. Two wildly separate things. A gay Republican and a gay trans person are not even close to similar. See, if you're gay and Republican, you can just go to the Republican National Convention and get your urges out on Grindr. Trans people can't do that. If you're trans, truly, you're probably looking to actually assimilate into the gender or sex you wish to be in reality. That's what you want to do. You want to get transition surgery. You want to do all this stuff. You want to affirm your gender identity. That's what you want to do. If you're gay, you can just trick your buddy in a drunk night is what you can do. You can just trick them. You can just say, hey, we're buddies. Come on. One little tug ain't gonna hurt. It's significantly easier to be gay in Republican spaces than it is to be trans. Because in real life, authoritarian movements operate through institutions, enforcement, and paperwork. Those systems do not negotiate with personal narratives or online loyalty badges. Bureaucracy does not care how obedient you feel or how loudly you defended the movement on social media. Offline reality forces proximity to law enforcement, employers, landlords, doctors, courts, whatever it may be, and those systems behave according to policy rather than whatever vibe you have, because it's very vibe based. That friction exposes the fragility of exception thinking, which is what happens a lot of the time, which is why this identity configuration rarely survives sustained offline exposure. Online contradiction can be aesthetic. Oh, look at this black guy who hates black people. Oh, look at this white person who who actively only cares about every other race besides white people and isn't annoying. This is crazy. Offline, contradiction is insane. It's a file, a record, a denial. It's a removal from your set group. You cannot be a true contradiction all the time offline. Online, you're brave. You're brave for saying what nobody else wants to say. But offline, you can't do that in big groups for a sustained amount of time. Imagine if you're a hardcore furry and you've never even considered putting on animal ears and you hate furries overall, but you really enjoy being around furries. It's just a strange type thing. You still call yourself a furry. It's how it works right there. Sorry about all the furry talk, guys. I just came back from Motor City FurCon, and I gotta say this as a quick aside real fast. There are so many interesting looking people at the Motor City FurCon. They all look exactly the same variety of a 35 out of 100, and there's 1-7 inside the group coitus, the group butt smacking. It's strange. I don't want to get into that right now. It's just it's on my mind right now. It's just stuck in there. One prominent thing about Adolf is that he was a leader of an authoritarian movement, and he attracted marginalized individuals specifically because they promised certainty in a world that already is deeply conflicted with chaos, humiliation, instability. When someone has experienced marginalization, uncertainty feels lethal. It's sad, as opposed to what it's supposed to feel like, which is philosophical. Rigid systems offer emotional anesthesia. That is what people go through. Order feels safe when life has felt very arbitrary. Discipline is comforting when identity has always felt contested. Authoritarian ideology offers a script that removes ambiguity and replaces it with rules, hierarchy, punishment. That clarity can feel as if somebody is finally getting a breath of fresh air to someone deeply exhausted by constant negotiation of their very existence. And that is insane, because that control becomes seductive when autonomy has only ever resulted in deep vulnerability about one's own personal image and self, especially when conflicted with the nonsense of what they probably see. And that is the issue with interacting with extremist ideologies. This is what happens. Give you an example. Let's say you don't know if you're trans. No idea. You're an egg. You're a trans egg. You're a little egg baby. And you say to yourself, wow, I really need to get into the trans ideology. So you dive deep first into TikTok and you discover neo-pronouns, and you discover people that say, well, you're not trans if you do this, and you're trans if you do this, and this is important, and maybe you have ADHD and you gotta play fighting games. And you say, what? I'm horrible at melty blood. And you think you're a trans woman horrible at melty blood. That's not even possible. So you get all these things, all these stereotypes, all these prejudices put behind you, and you don't even have a chance to have your own identity journey because you're looking for a template and an outlet. And then you see the far right says, all right, well, you guys can be trans, but you got to go through the proper channels, and we got to pass some legislation, and this matters, and this is important. And you want to be the person that's different because everybody knows that, hey, it's very important to be different in this community because it's about your own self journey. But you're only hearing extremist ideologies online. So this propagates, and you've chosen to not listen to the neo-pronouns and the furries and all this other stuff. You decide to listen to the far right. And that's what happens because you feel insecure in your own self. There's also a transactional fantasy embedded in authoritarian belief that appeals deeply to marginalized people who are tired of begging for dignity. And this fantasy, it always appears. It says obedience will be rewarded and conformity will be protected. Loyalty will be remembered. That's how these authoritarian beliefs work. It suggests very deeply that pain can be made meaningful through service to something larger. It's how Christians operate. It's how the law operates. It's how the army operates. That's what it is. Suffering can become tolerable when it earns proximity to power. It's a hazing ritual of what it means to actually be within these certain sections. For someone whose identity has been politicized by others, authoritarian is reclaiming agency by choosing the terms of the submission. And when a submission feels voluntary, it's great. Feels nice. You actually choose to suffer in this mindset, and it's nice for them. This isn't even a specific trans moment, right? This mindset mirrors historical patterns. See, minority individuals align themselves with dominant power structures in hopes of insulation through proximity. Throughout history, marginalized people have attempted survival by becoming enforcers, informants, ideological spokespeople, cultural validators for systems that fundamentally rejected them. The belief always followed the same internal rule: usefulness guarantees safety. I'll give you a perfect example of what this is. A Jeffree Star. I know it's a crazy thing to say. Jeffree Star is wildly far right at the current moment. It's like, oh, they hate me because I'm a gay man who talks to the far right. Whenever you see somebody of this variety, this is insane. It's ridiculous. That loyalty is guaranteeing survival. Oh, look, no, this one trans person gets it. This trans person understands that they have a mental disorder. This trans person understands this. This trans person understands that. And it creates this hole, this pocket, this divvying pocket for the far right to actually push upon what they believe. What they believe is that you guys are all crazy and this person is the only sane one because they're on the far right and they're trans and they make sense. And then this allows that trans person to be the bridge for the right to talk about the trans community. One of the good ones is the best way I can describe it. One of the good ones. That's the best way I can say it. The system never had to change for this logic to feel convincing in the moment, because the promise of temporary protection is better than the risk of that collective resistance. You get it? One of the good ones mindset. However, what history shows repeatedly is that authoritarian systems value compliance until they are no longer needed. And then they revert to purity enforcement, and that's where it gets bad. See, exception status expires the moment it becomes inconvenient, politically costly, or ideologically impure. For instance, let's say we have a really cool Mexican guy who is a white nationalist, and I'm not using any examples, Nick Fuentes. Let's say that, boom, people think he's a cool Mexican guy, not really sure what's going on there, really strange. I don't think he's cool at all, but that's how they describe Nick Fuentes, and he's been popping up a lot recently because he is actually going against the MAGA ideology, and he is talking about America first. The system does not remember loyalty as gratitude. It rewards loyalty as evidence that obedience was possible. Once obedience is proven possible, deviation becomes punishable because you have allowed yourself to be within this mindset. This is why marginalized collaborators historically end up discarded, erased, or rewritten as heirs once the regime consolidates the power. That's what always happens. Oh, these exceptions to the rule are always put in the pooper. Uncle Toms of the world. This is what happens. If we have the Library of Alexandria online, this big, disgusting wealth of knowledge, why do we always make this mistake with this far-right trans ideology? Online spaces is the issue because they distort this lesson because history is aesthetic. That's all it is. It's reduced to memes, slogans, selective anecdotes. That's how it works over time. People consume history as identity content rather than consequence change because history repeats. Algorithms reward contrarianism. That's what it is. Because when you are a contrarian, it feels as if you're smart, brave, independent. And a far-right trans identity online becomes framed as rebellion against perceived cultural dominance. I predict this video will probably do really good because it feels strange. People have not heard this before. My guess is maybe it'll get to 10,000 views on a Friday at 4 p.m. at around 8 o'clock. That's my guess. And the next day I wake up at 70,000 and then people are arguing in the comments and they're talking about it and they're saying, yeah, I met people like this. I actually know a few furries of this variety. I play Melty Blood. Whoa, you pointed out Guilty Gear? I play Guilty Gear. I know a few people in the community like that because this is not a unnatural phenomenon. The internet flips power dynamics into vibes, and vibes override material analysis. The distortion makes historically failed survival strategies feel innovative and bold rather than what they are in reality. They're doomed. They're completely doomed. They're just ruined. There's ruin. Another big reason why this appears online is that authoritarian movements online tolerate symbolic diversity longer than they tolerate actual difference. See, a trans person defending a far-right ideology online functions as proof of legitimacy and complexity. It's this supposed openness. See? We have trans people here. We have everybody. I don't care if you're white, green, blue, black. Doesn't really matter to me. Their presence grants them temporary platform protection, right? Their existence becomes rhetorical utility. Offline, symbolic values, they just evaporate. Once policy implementation begins, because policy requires uniform enforcement. The moment rules are written, edge cases stop being interesting, start being inconvenient. Online, no rule ever has to be finalized. Ever. It never has to happen. It just does not have to happen. I believe there is a very prominent far-right trans influencer. God, what is her name? Blair White. Blair White. It came to me in a dream. Blair White. That's her name. Blair White. Blair White is an example of this. And there's this psychological comfort in rejecting collective identity when collective identity has been a source of pain. Let me explain what I mean by this. This is probably going to make a lot more sense to a lot of people. Some marginalized people experience their community primarily through conflict, infighting, moral policing, and public scrutiny. Right? You ever have a disagreement with somebody because you don't like a specific part of the community and then they morally police you, or you have a conflict with another gay person, or you have a conflict in the infighting, or maybe you have an issue with black people. You see this a lot when it comes to black nerds who got bullied by hip-hop hood black people, and then they grow up hating black people, and then they choose to say, well, I was never really a fan of black culture because they've always bullied me for being a nerd, or I was reading Marvel and DC comics and they hate me. I don't really feel black. You ever experience those people? That's how they experience the entirety of it. When you have this authoritarian ideology, it's an escape from that by declaring individuality irrelevant and hierarchy supreme. That's what it is. Big supreme sandwich. Belonging becomes simple again. You obey, you align, you shut up, you are counted. That's it. That's all you need. Very military mindset. The emotional relief of that simplicity can outweigh long-term self-interest, especially when someone feels exhausted by this endless cultural negotiation of what they have to do with their own self and their own body, and you just want to be you. And thus, you go to authoritarianism. Biggest issue I've noticed about the entire far-right trans ideology is that the pattern always repeats. Always. It's often short-term psychological relief while delaying the long-term consequences. And the reason I made this video is because there are a lot of long-term consequences. Online life amplifies short-term rewards. That's it. That's all that happens. When you see a viral moment that goes big on Twitter, when you see that Twitch streamer or that Kick streamer or that TikTok streamer do something viral for content, that's short-term love. It thrives in comment sections and podcasts and live streams and these anonymous platforms. And as soon as you have the real world to interact with these things, it falls apart. It's a big reason why the comment sections of a lot of things don't really, to me, represent the bulk of reality. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't work. History repeats because the emotional logic of survival keeps finding the same seductive answers over and over and over again. The tragedy is believing that obedience will be remembered as humanity when power has never worked that way. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you ever want to support me financially in any meaningful way, I do have a Patreon. It is in the top comment, and I'm sure that I put it in the description. Have a lovely day or night wherever you're at. I'm out. Peace. Bye.
I'm your Nick and Night, be my Laurel. Happy to try what you need. Your world, I love to live in it. I love the ride when you're free.